Hi there, Daily Gardeners. We are in the home stretch of the Reviews for Good campaign over at podchaser.com. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Marcia JS0083, who left a review for the show yesterday. And then just to give a big virtual hug to all of you who answered my call to be part of Podchaser's Reviews for Good campaign 2022. You know, in my 10-year experience of being a podcaster, no other podcast organization has been as generous as Podchaser, an organization that is willing to donate money for podcast reviews. It's just unheard of in the industry. Now, of course, you can always head on over to Podchaser and leave a review for the show, but it's during this month of April that Podchaser will donate 25 cents for your review and then 25 cents for my reply to World Central Kitchen. So if you have a chance, please consider leaving a review for the show over at podchaser.com. Just search for The Daily Gardener, and then when the podcast pops up, click on the little star rating, and then there's room for you to leave a review. And it doesn't have to be anything long. It's entirely up to you. The bottom line is it's very easy to do, and so much good can come from it. Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is April 29th. Today in garden history, we celebrate St. Robert's Day. St. Robert of Molesma was an 11th century herbalist, abbot, and founder of the Cistercian order, a Catholic religious order of monks and nuns that branched off from the Benedictines. They're also known as Bernardines, after the highly influential Bernard of Clairvaux, or as white monks, in reference to the color of the cowl worn over their habits, as opposed to the black cowl worn by Benedictines. They're also commonly called Trappists. Now, many common wildflowers are named in honor of St. Robert, and some believe that Herb Robert, or birdseye, the little wild geranium, was named in honor of St. Robert. Another theory is that Herb Robert is named for Robin Goodfellow, a pseudonym for the forest sprite known as Puck. And it was on this day, April 29th in 1852, that Henri Frederic Amiel, the Swiss philosopher and poet, wrote these words in his journal. I went out into the garden to see what progress the spring was making. I strolled from the irises to the lilacs, round the flower beds and in the shrubberies. Delightful surprise. At the corner of the walk, half hidden under a thick clump of shrubs, a small-leafed corchorus had flowered during the night. The little shrub glittered before me. And then he asks, Mother of marvels, mysterious and tender nature, why do we not live more in thee? And today, we also celebrate the birthday of the American botanist Agnes Chase, who was born on this day, April 29th in 1869. Agnes was an agrostologist, or a studier of grass. She was a petite, fearless, indefatigable person, and entirely self-taught as a botanist. Agnes's first position was as an illustrator at the USDA's Bureau of Plant Industry in Washington, D.C., and she worked for the botanist Albert Speer Hitchcock. And when Albert applied for funding to go on expeditions, the higher-ups approved the travel for him, but not for Agnes, saying that the job belonged to, quote, real research men. Well, undeterred, Agnes raised her own funding to go on the trips, and she cleverly partnered with missionaries in Latin America to arrange for accommodations for herself with host families. Agnes shrewdly observed, the missionaries travel everywhere, like botanists do, on as little money as possible. And they gave me information that saved me much time and trouble. Well, during a climb of one of the highest mountains in Brazil, Agnes reportedly returned to camp with her skirt filled with plant specimens. One of Agnes's major works was called The First Book of Grasses, and it was translated into both Spanish and Portuguese. And this book single-handedly taught generations of Latin American botanists about grasses. And these Latin American professionals recognized Agnes's contributions long before their American counterparts. Now, when Albert Speer Hitchcock retired, Agnes was his backfill. But when Agnes reached retirement age, she ignored that rite of passage altogether and refused to be put out to pasture. She kept going to work 6 days a week, overseeing the largest collection of grasses in the world in her office under the Red Towers at her beloved Smithsonian Institution. When Agnes was 89, she became the 8th person to become an honorary fellow of the Smithsonian. And I had to chuckle when I stumbled on a newspaper article that was covering the event. A reporter commented that Dr. Chase looked impatient, as if she were muttering to herself, "This may be well and good, but it isn't getting any grass classified, Sonny." Well, when I was researching Agnes, I also stumbled on a little article in the St. Louis Star and Times. And this piece was featuring one of Agnes's books on grass. It had a biblical title, and it was called The Meek That Inherit the Earth. And the article said this: Mrs. Chase began her study of grass by reading about it in the Bible. In the very first chapter of Genesis, the first living thing that the Creator made was grass, for grass is fundamental to life. Agnes said, "Grass is what holds the earth together. Grass made it possible for the human race to abandon cave life and follow herds. Civilization was based on grass, and this significance still holds." And today we wish a happy birthday to the American stand-up comedian, actor, writer, and producer Jerry Seinfeld, who was born on this day, April 29th in 1954. Jerry is best known for playing a semi-fictionalized version of himself in the sitcom Seinfeld, which he created and wrote with Larry David. Jerry once joked, "Why do people give each other flowers to celebrate various important occasions? They're killing living creatures? Why restrict it to plants? Sweetheart, let's make up. Have this deceased squirrel." And it was on this day, April 29th in 2017, that the New York Times optimistically tweeted that the Brooklyn Botanic Garden Cherry Blossom Festival is set for today and tomorrow, regardless of when nature decides to push play. And we can certainly relate to that this spring in Minnesota. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Language of Butterflies by Wendy Williams. This book came out in 2020, and the subtitle is How Thieves, Hoarders, Scientists, and Other Obsessives Unlocked the Secrets of the World's Favorite Insect. Well, I tell you what, if you're a fan of blue morpho butterflies, then you're going to love the cover of Wendy's book because it is covered with a kaleidoscope of blue morpho butterflies. So it's impossibly beautiful. And Wendy's book is a 5-star book on Amazon. Now, Wendy is an author who loves spending time outdoors. She loves skiing. She loves horseback riding. In fact, her first best-selling book was called The Horse. And Wendy has traveled the world. She spent a lot of time in Africa, in Europe, and in the North American mountain chains and prairies. But when it comes to just regular daily life, she lives in Cape Cod in Massachusetts with her husband and her border collie, Taff. Now, I love the way that Wendy writes because she's very conversational. And I also like how she organized this book. She's got 3 main sections: the past, the present, and the future. And then just to show you how friendly her writing is, her chapters have very intriguing titles. In the section on the past, there's one called The Gateway Drug, The Number One Butterfly, and then How Butterflies Saved Charles Darwin's Bacon. Great chapter. And then in the present, she talks about A Parasol of Monarchs, The Honeymoon Hotel, and there's a chapter called On the Rain Dance Ranch. Great story in there. And then in the future, she talks about The Social Butterfly, The Paroxysms of Ecstasy, and The Butterfly Highway. And Wendy is right. Butterflies are the world's most beloved insects. They've been called flying flowers. And of course, gardeners are passionate about butterflies. And many gardeners today are working to help save the monarch from extinction. Now, the Washington Post says this about Wendy's book: Williams takes us on a humorous and beautifully crafted journey that explores both the nature of these curious and highly intelligent insects and the eccentric individuals who coveted them. And of course, most of those folks were scientists and or botanists. So I love this book. I love all of those stories. This book is 256 pages of butterflies. It's eye-opening, tender, and an incredibly profound look at butterflies. It's a butterfly biography, and it examines the very important role that butterflies play in our world. You can get a copy of The Language of Butterflies by Wendy Williams and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $2. Great deal. So get it on your list. All right, we end today's show, our last show for the month of April, with a botanic spark that I've been waiting to share with you. And this is an excerpt from Carol Capick's chapter on The Gardener's April. And it's an excerpt from his book called The Gardener's Year, which came out in 1984. And I love what he wrote here. Carol wrote, "Gardeners have certainly arisen by culture and not by natural selection. If they had developed naturally, they would look differently. They would have legs like beetles, so that they need not sit on their heels, and they would have wings, in the first place for their beauty, and secondly, so that they might float over the beds. Those who have no experience cannot imagine how one's legs are in the way when there's nothing to stand on, how stupidly long they are, or how impossibly short they are if one has to reach to the other side of the bed without treading on a clump of pyrethrum, that's chrysanthemum, or on the shoots of columbine. If only one could hang in a belt and swim over the beds, or have at least 4 hands, with only a head and a cap and nothing else. But because the gardener is outwardly constructed as imperfectly as other people, all he can do is to show of what he is capable, to balance on tiptoe on one foot, to float in the air like a Russian dancer, to straddle 4 yards wide, to step as lightly as a butterfly or a wagtail, to reach everywhere and avoid everything, and still try to keep some sort of respectability so that people will not laugh at him. Of course, at a passing glance from a distance, you don't see anything of the gardener but his rump. Everything else, like the head, arms, and legs, is hidden underneath." Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. I hope you have a great weekend and a wonderful May Day. I hope you get some time in the garden. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.